speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Covello,
Retired.
U.S. Air Force retired. And we're talking about the career experiences of Colonel Covello, starting off in the 1950s.
Yep.
When did you join the Air Force?
Well, it was during the Korean War. Right after college, I went to St. John's and in New York, and I was about to be drafted, so I joined the Air Force instead. I did have some interest in aviation, and let's see, it was November 21st, 1952, that I left for Ellington Air Force Base, and this, in fact, was my first flight in an aircraft, in an airplane, from New York to Houston, Texas. And completing cadet training in 1953, I had been in the pipeline for Korea. However, the Korean War ended before I finished my training. And instead of going to Korea, I lucked out and went to Germany, and I was in the RB-26 program, which was reconnaissance mission in Germany at the time. From the I was in B-26s, I'd say about 6-7 months, when they transferred me to Neuwied, Germany, near Munich, for the C-119, which is a 2-engine cargo airplane. I flew that for about 3 years, came back to the States. Meantime, I got married to a German lady. Let's see, it was about 1962 or so, maybe later, that I went to Randolph Air Force Base as a instructor in the KC-97 tanker program for navigators. From there, I went to Air Force ROTC as an instructor at Kenyon College, Ohio, which is in the central part of the state. From there, the Vietnam War had started, and I was in the pipeline for Vietnam.
Okay, before you went to Vietnam, you went to survival training?
Yeah.
Where'd you go to survival training?
Jungle survival training. Well, the first part of it was in Washington State, and then from there we went to the Philippines for this actual jungle survival training. All air crew members had to do that. And from there, that course was about 6 weeks. We all went to Vietnam. But before that, I wanted to talk about experience I had at Kenyon College. I was close to 3 years there, and I was in the office one afternoon, a Monday afternoon, alone. We had three military people, my boss, myself, and a sergeant, and a civilian secretary. I received a phone call from the Pentagon notifying us that a young staff sergeant from the area had been killed, and my boss and I were to notify his parents, which was a very tough thing to do. Anyway, my boss came back in time, and the two of us went up to this small town of Fredericktown and notified his mother, who was at home with an adult son, luckily, and we broke the news. It was very, very sad, and it brought home to me and impressed me very much that here I was already notified of going to Vietnam, and you didn't know what you could expect. The staff sergeant was killed just 2 hours before he was to leave. He was catching an airplane to San Francisco. Anyway, I went to Benoit which was near the city of Saigon, assigned to the O2 Super Skymaster, which is this airplane here, as a model of it, made by Don Spurring, by the way, from Mount Holly. And it was two-place, a pilot and a navigator. Navigators flew almost exclusively at night using a starlight scope. Now, a starlight scope was nothing more than a telescope which amplified light 40,000 times. So if you were flying over a jungle and someone lit a cigarette under a triple canopy jungle, you would see the light. Anyway, our job there at Benoit was to circle around the city and the airfields and try to spot any rocket launches. And this period was right after Tet, and Tet was a Viet Cong offensive, and we never did see any rocket launches, and but we did work with the Army, especially artillery positions, and so I flew that mission for about 6 months.
What training did you have prior to getting? What training did you have prior to getting into the aircraft?
For the O2?
Yeah.
Zero.
I mean, you just went cold
They
turkey?
just took navigators who hadn't been flying, and I was in this ROTC assignment, so I wasn't in an operational unit. And so they just took us, put us in the right seat, and said, here, open the window, stick the starlight scope out and see what you see. And it was interesting there, but I'd say it was relatively safe. The biggest thing you had to worry about were other airplanes in the area. One incident that happened there I'd like to relate. My pilot and I, Denny Fendelender, were given the mission of trying to rescue an Army unit who had gone into close to the Cambodian border to rescue some prisoners who had been taken. Well, we got up there and made radio contact with this group. Incidentally, I think they had two U.S. Army people leading it and about 8 or 9 Cambodian mercenaries. Can you believe that? We used mercenaries then. And so we circled around, made radio contact, and the leader down there was whispering to us what was happening. He was surrounded by Viet Cong. And Denny, I guess in the excitement of it all, hit the wrong toggle switch. There was a toggle switch there that controlled the parachute flares or the Willie Pete rockets, white phosphorus rockets, which made smoke. And there was another a piece there called a log flare, which would just drop on the ground and burn. Well, he hit the parachute flare, and this whole area lit up, 1,000,000 candle power. And I just went, "Oh, Denny, oh God!" And this thing burns for about a minute or 2 minutes. Anyway, nothing happened to the group on the ground, and we brought in a C-47 gunship, would circle the area and just hose the area down with their Gatling guns, which fired 600 rounds a minute. An F-100 came in, he dropped bombs, and then finally 3 helicopters from the Army came in and rescued these guys. So they were out of it. And that was about probably the most exciting thing that happened in at Benoit. New Year's Eve, 1968, we flew 3 airplanes back to Da Nang. I was actually assigned to Da Nang and was really a temporary duty at Benoit. But Da Nang was quite a different mission for the O2. We flew only at night over Laos. From Da Nang to Laos was maybe a 30-minute flight in the O2, which got up to the supersonic speed of 120 knots. And anyway, What we did there was a mission of interdiction on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And I might explain that the Ho Chi Minh Trail for the North Vietnamese brought supplies down in trucks to the Viet Cong or the units, the North Vietnamese units in South Vietnam. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was just not one road. It was just a web of roads. So we were assigned an area, and we flew that area at night to see what we could see, and then called in strikes from, could be Navy fighters or Air Force F-4s, F-100s, whatever. And we did this. It got hairy, I have to say that, because they were top-level gunners, these North Vietnamese, and they had what was a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft guns, and a variety of other types stationed along this web. And you know, you'd be reading your map there at night. The cockpit would be relatively dark, except for this, and the whole cockpit will light up as traces would go by you, you know. And
Did they have a way of tracking you?
at the time, I don't think so. I don't know whether they tracked us or not. But what happened another night that really, I thought this was time to check out, you know, say Our Father before you do. We were flying again over Laos, over a road, and I could see on the right side of the airplane, the navigator said on the right side, traces coming up. And so I told the pilot, Robbie, brake left. And he said, I can't. We've got traces on the other side. And I had to look up the front, and traces were coming up, and we just put that little airplane into all kinds of maneuvers to get out of there. And the thing about it was, in the excitement of it all, you wouldn't worry about it until you got on the ground, and then you start thinking about it. Well, what would have happened here? And it wasn't a very good feeling. I flew out of Da Nang for about maybe 3 to 4 months, and then the last part of my tour I spent in the operations center, and I left there in June of 1969. So I spent the whole year in Vietnam.
Any interesting stories about being the public affairs officer?
Oh, you know, sometimes, a lot of times on the air evac mission, the air evacuation mission to Frankfurt. And
Now, where did the Aerovac missions go? How did they work?
well, you flew out of McGuire to generally to Rhine-Main Air Base near Frankfurt, Germany, and from there the patients were loaded onto the aeromedical evacuation equipped airplane, the C-141, and it was loaded with litters, and I think there was one nurse and 2 med techs as the medical crew, as I recall, and we took quite a few reporters on this. It was a good human interest type story for them, and it highlighted the reservists who were mostly local people. So
Now, these were not make-believe training missions.
No. These were the real thing. As a matter of fact, I remember flying on one before I retired. We had an Army lieutenant on board who passed away during the flight. And I remember navigating up there, and someone called from down below and said, what are our coordinates? And I said, well, why do you need coordinates? I said, well, this lieutenant died, and we have to know just where it was.
Let's go back to your days in flying the KC-97, which is the model to your
right
left
here.
there. You were in the 100th Bomb Wing, the 100th Air Refueling Squadron, and during that period, that was a time where the two nations fought each other off through mutual assured destruction, and we sat alert. Tell us about alert duty and where you pulled alert. Did you go? Where did you pull the? How about explaining what alert was and where it was?
It was SAC Alert, Strategic Air Command, and we, me and tankers, had the responsibility, if a war did break out, of refueling the bombers, the B-47s or B-52s, that were on their way to bomb this, whoever it was, Soviet Union or whatever. And we did alert mainly at Goose Bay, Labrador, the garden spot of Canada. And we'd fly up to Goose Bay, as you know, and sit on alert there for a week, waiting for the war to start.
Where did you live?
At the time?
Mm-hmm. No, where did you live when you were in alert? Where?
Oh, we lived in the so-called mole hole.
And what was that?
Naval quarters for air crews. You had your room down there, and everyone slept in the mole hole and ate in the mole hole. And each crew was assigned a vehicle, so you could go around the base. At least you could visit the base exchange or go to the movie and so on, but you couldn't get out of the area so that it would take you, well, I think it was 15 minutes from the time you were alerted to the time your engines start and you started to taxi out. And
how does, if you were in the club or in the exchange, how would you know there was an alert?
Okay, we had the klaxon, which went off, and this meant you dropped everything you were doing and ran to your vehicle. Got in the vehicle. Let's say you were in the mole hole at the time and the klaxon went off. You could have been sleeping. This happened a few times, and the alert went off, and you slipped on your boots and your flying suit and your jacket, and headed to the vehicle and out to the flight line. And there you, as a navigator, as I recall, our job was to get the engine covers off, and as the pilot started to rotate the engines, and you immediately got inside, closed the door, and up to your position, and taxied out. You had to do all this within 15 minutes. The timing, 15 minutes, was based on the time it would take a missile from the Soviet Union to be launched, detected, and hit your base. So you had to be in the air.
Well, the weather at Goose Bay in the wintertime gets pretty cold. How'd they keep the airplanes warm so that the oil wouldn't congeal?
Yeah, they were constantly on the what they call those things.
Herman Nelson heaters.
Herman Nelson's, yeah. Yeah. Kept running all the time and kept the engines warm as needed.
Yeah. Were you the public affairs officer when the 514th airplane crashed in
Yes,
Mildenhall?
I was. Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? What was the after effect of that?
It was a very tragic day because two C-141s, one from the active duty unit and one from the 514th, crashed on the same day. The 514th airplane crashed in England, right outside of Mildenhall, and the active duty airplane crashed at Sonderstrom. I think on ours, there were 14 people killed. It was basically a training mission, of course, to also carrying cargo. And our airplane got caught between two thunderstorms and rocked by the updrafts of the wind, and rocked the airplane around and they cracked the wings, and as they were trying to approach Mildenhall, the wing fell off and the airplane crashed in the field. I would say it was about 4 or 5 years later that we held a ceremony there, and the squadron, the 702nd, put up a monument with the names of all the crew members who died in that crash, and it was placed in the field close to where the airplane perished.
You know, at Starlifter Park, at the Joint Base, there's a big memorial stone that memorializes that also.
Yeah, that was put up by the McGuire Foundation.
McGuire Foundation and the VFW.
Yeah, and the VFW.
Well, you've had a very interesting career. I mean, when you look at it, you started off in a propeller-driven aircraft, ended up in jet-driven aircraft.
Well, the first time I saw the 141, I didn't think it would fly without propellers.
Super. Let's leave it as a wrap.
Okay.